So some biographical information. He was born in Geneva, Switzerland, and at the time it was its own little country. And Geneva is right here. The country was like around this big, but it's part of modern-day Switzerland. His birthday is the 28th of June in 1712. And when he was 10 years old, he had to go and live with his uncle because his dad got in trouble with the government. He was trespassing on some rich guy's property, and so he had to flee to Germany, I believe. And then later, after this, he ran away from home to start like his own life to Turin, Savoy. And Savoy is right south of this, like around here. That also used to be its own little country, but then in like the 19th century, it became part of Italy. And more biographical information. He didn't really know what he wanted to do as a teenager. He did a lot of odd jobs, like he was a servant to a few people, and he was a tailor at one point, I believe. But then he finally sort of found his place to begin his career in sort of philosophy and music, which he liked, and that was being secretary to the French ambassador to Venice. There, not necessarily the job itself, but like because he's in Venice, he got to hear a lot of Italian classical music, and music was really his first passion before philosophy. And yeah, at the time he became interested in Italian classical music. So his first book he wrote in 1750. It was called The Discourse on the Arts and Sciences. And this wasn't just some like practice bad book. It was like really good. People all over Europe liked it. So right from the get-go, he was really popular all around Europe. And he also started writing music at this time. As I said, like in Venice, he picked up the interest. And his music was actually pretty good, and he got to play the music before the King of France, King Louis XV. And the king even offered him some money because the music was so good, he wanted to give him some pay, and he even refused it. And then in the music world, he became like known as the guy who didn't take the little pay that the king was going to give him. And especially his later books, not so much the earlier ones, like the Discourse on Arts and Science, that can't really be that controversial. But like his later books were about like the church and government, and during this time in the 18th century, that was like some serious bureaucracy in France. Like you didn't want to mess with that, and so it was so controversial that he had to flee to England eventually. He's going from place to place. Like he went from his homeland to France, then back there, and then it was still controversial there, so then he went back to England, and that's where he ended up. And later he died on the 2nd of July in 1778, and he died he was in France at the time, just visiting or something, but he mainly lived in England at the time. So this is his philosophy. Jean-Jacques Rousseau talks about a lot of things, not just like one thing in particular. He likes to talk about music, books, and human nature, but his main interest is between the relationship with people in the government and how they interact. And human nature, this is what he has to say about human nature. He says that men in nature are not evil or really good because there's no good or bad in nature. Since you're like by yourself or in this little tribe thing, there's no one really around you to tell you that something's good or bad, so you wouldn't know otherwise. So it's sort of like you're naive, but also because you're like pure in nature, which it says down here at the bottom. Because we're pure, we have to be changed by society, and we have to have other people tell us that something's bad and laws have to be made. And in nature, some characteristics that we have self-interest, but we also care about others. So it's not entirely like just about the self. You still have empathy for others and help them out sometimes. That's like, in comparison to some other philosophers, they said like humans are only selfish, they do things only to benefit themselves. So this is an example of a human in nature. So this is SpongeBob. SpongeBob doesn't really think about what's right or wrong. He just like does stuff off of impulse, and he like adheres also cares for others. Like, even Squidward, he cares about him, even though the results of what he does revolving around Squidward, they vary. Like, sometimes he gets into a lot of trouble with him. But it's not because he hates him or wants something bad to happen to him. He, like, genuinely cares. And he's not, like, thinking it's good or bad. Just like the human nature before. And this is Human Nature Continued. And he talks about how civilization creates all the bad things in the world. So some examples: inequality, envy, and unnatural desires come only from society. Otherwise, if you were just like in the pure nature, like human form, you wouldn't see these things because society creates them. And society also creates self-love in people, like being really selfish and arrogant. Because they can compare themselves to others. So many people are around you. So like you can compare any number of things like wealth or talent or education or something. And this is an example of how society could change someone. This is Squidward. He's some qualities that he exhibits. He's very arrogant. Like whenever he interacts with SpongeBob or anyone, he says he's always above it. He really isn't, but he always pretends like he is. He's also very jealous, like, it's subtle, but like he wishes he was something bigger. Like he reads magazines about rich people, and even his antithesis, William, who's like rich and educated and stuff, he's like jealous of him, and he tries to outplay him and one-up him. He's depressed. This is probably the most obvious trait. Squidward, SpongeBob and Patrick ruin his day on a regular basis, and he doesn't like his job or anything. He's also obsessed with like culture. He like plays the clarinet and he does artwork and likes interpretive dance, but he's not really good at it at all, and he just has this obsession which can never be satisfied. But he says that not all society is bad, it can actually be good. If the circumstances are right, a man can become good and intelligent, but it's the harder path to go. Like it's a lot easier to become selfish, he says, and just give in to what most people do. But to do this, they have to use reason and morality. So this is what he says on the government, basically. He talks a lot about the government, and he says that the government should really be only what everyone wants, the general will. He talks about like how what happens in government, like laws and programs and stuff, should be what everyone wants, and that there shouldn't be someone, like a king or a group of people, like a senate, who decide everything. Like in this country, our senate can pass laws and stuff, and that's decided for everyone. Even though we elect them, he says it's bad because it's not necessarily the general will, even though it's closer than like a king who would just pass whatever he wants, and that's it. He says government should be small, like Geneva, his hometown, but not like France or even our country, which are really big. That's because it's a lot easier to gauge the general will of, say, 10,000 people than 100 million people. It gets really complex, and you can't really give everyone what they want. This is government continued. He says the general will, what everyone wants, should be what happens. And it should only be to benefit society and cooperation, and they shouldn't take things like freedom away for no reason. Like even if everyone wants to ban Judaism into society or something, that shouldn't happen because it's not necessarily going to benefit the society in any way. And it's just taking freedom away for no reason, or freedom of speech and freedom of the press or something. It's not, although it might benefit the government, it's not like benefiting everyone because they're now restricted to saying certain things. And that it's sort of like our Constitution, which we have, which like checks with the Senate, in that they can't pass laws that violate the Constitution. Also influences, these are people he influenced with his work. He influenced Karl Marx, which Mr. Curry did a presentation on. He also was a big influence on the Romantic naturalism movement in Great Britain and sort of in America, but not as much. His ideas also influence debate today about topics that are still discussed, like things on human nature and government. They're still discussed and argued today by philosophers, and no one really knows the right answer, and people still use his ideas to sort of argue their points. These are my citations. And I have a short story which kind of illustrates the philosophy, but it's not that great. I'm not making any promises, so.
Rocket.
It's sort of there. So, once upon a time, there was a kid named Billy. Billy liked to play with his toys. He was the only kid in the neighborhood, and he didn't have anyone else to play with. Sometimes he would go outside and play basketball, and sometimes when it was raining, he would go inside and just play with his toys. One day, some kids moved into the neighborhood. They all had toys too. One kid named Tim had a lot of toys. His toys were a lot better than everyone else's. He also had a lot more because his parents were wealthy. He didn't like sharing his toys at all. Billy wondered why he didn't have toys that were as good as his friends. Billy became jealous. One day he went to his parents and asked them why he didn't have toys like Tim's. They explained it to him, but he didn't understand. All he knew was that he wasn't getting the kind of toys Tim had. Tim already had the best stuff, but now he was bossing other kids around. He would make everyone else get him things he wanted and do his chores. The other kids got mad and started a fight. Another kid in the neighborhood, Julia, tried to break up the fight. Eventually she did, and she said instead of fighting that we should play a different game. She said that nobody should be able to boss everyone else around and we should work together. The other kids agreed, and from then on the kids had a lot more fun. Everyone shared their toys, and they got along well. The end.